Good morning, students, staff, family, friends, and all honored guests, especially our veterans. Welcome to Ross St. Netherwood School's Ceremony of Remembrance. Canada's first Remembrance Day, originally called Armistice Day, service was held at 11 o'clock on November 11, 1919. Its purpose was to honor the 600,000 Canadians and 12,000 Newfoundlanders who had given their lives during the four-year struggle from 1914 to 1918. This was called at the time the Great War and was considered and hoped to be the war to end all wars. Sadly, the Second World War broke out in Europe in 1939. This war lasted until 1945, and more than 1 million more Canadians were added to the honor roll. Each year, we come together to honor the many servicemen and women who were injured or lost their lives for our country. We honor the doctors and nurses who comforted and healed the wounded, the factory workers who supported the war effort, the families who got by on less so our soldiers could have more, the wives and mothers who lost husbands and sons, and the children who lost fathers. We also honor the many courageous men and women who continue to serve today. Canada has earned a position of respect for its peacekeeping efforts worldwide. We are blessed with many rights and freedoms. While almost 75 years after the end of World War II, millions of people elsewhere in the world live in poverty, filth, ignorance, oppression, fear, and hopelessness. As Canadians, we must continue to help the citizens of other countries to gain or maintain the same rights and freedoms they deserve. We must continue to accept, appreciate, and applaud differences in other cultures and countries, to value the lives of others as we value our own, and to work towards peace and harmony worldwide. Let us take this opportunity to thank our veterans and those who lost their lives for their courage, their sacrifice in the Canada we have today. Thank you.
Our opening hymn, I Vow to Be My Country. Please stand.
Please be seated. I'd like to call upon Lieutenant Colonel retired Chris Hand to offer reflections today. Lieutenant Colonel Hand is a past parent. His daughter Sarah graduated in 2012, and his son William graduated in 2015. So thank you for coming, Lieutenant Colonel Hand.
Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Chris Hand, or I'm retired. I have been retired now for 6 years. I work with the provincial government currently as your Chief Firearms Officer. So there is a life after your first job, if any of you ever get there. I haven't been in this hall. I think the last time was for Sarah's chapel speech. And the last time I got to speak in this, well, actually it was William's chapel speech, and the last time I got to speak was for Sarah's chapel speech. And some of you here may remember both of them, and they're doing well. I've been asked to come to speak today because I have a connection to the college, or connection to Ross A. Netherwood School, and one, because I'm a veteran. And as you can see, I wear my campaign ribbons on my chest. I did 32 years in the Canadian Army. I was a lieutenant colonel in the infantry of the Royal Canadian Regiment, whose banner you see above you, and you never stop wearing your school tie. That's the regimental tie. So if you think you're going to get away from it when you graduate, you won't. And if you look at it, I have served across the world, if you know how to read what the ribbons say. So I've been asked to speak about acts of remembrance. And I'd like to put out the idea to you today that there's two ways to do an act of remembrance. One is a collective act, and one is as an individual. And I think the collective acts of remembrance are the easiest ones to see. We're doing one right now in a Remembrance Day service, and they occur on Armistice Day, November the 11th. Other countries have their Remembrance Day or Veterans Days on other dates, but we celebrate it, like most of the Commonwealth countries, to mark the last shot of the end of the First World War. And we remember these things in Canada. That generation of men that came back from the First World War, men and women that came back, they did a number of things that allow us to go and mark Remembrance Day. They are the ones that are responsible for all the cenotaphs you see in virtually every town across Canada. They are the monuments, the cenotaphs that mark in the village squares. They built those to remember their friends and family that didn't come back with them back to Canada. They also did other things. They built places like this, Memorial Chapel. Matter of fact, if you see a rink, an arena, a hockey rink, a baseball diamond, a lawn bowling pitch, and it has the name Memorial in front of it in any town in Canada, it was built by veterans, and it's a memorial arena because they came home and said, we are going to provide an infrastructure and a future for our country where we can remember the sacrifice of our friends, and we can do something good for our country rather than the destruction we wrought on parts of Europe. So Canada is covered with these testaments and memorials and acts of remembrance everywhere you turn. There was also a great boom in service clubs. So if your fathers and your grandfathers were Shriners, Lions Club members, or any of those service clubs that are out there, they also grew as an act of community service and an act of remembrance by those veterans that came back saying we have to do something better than what we just went through. And you'll see them everywhere, and we're lucky in Canada that we have these things and that we can have a Remembrance Day at. If you are fortunate enough to actually go to Europe and visit some of the sites there, this is where those men that we remember are buried. Canada follows the convention of the Commonwealth up until recently, where those that died on the battlefield were buried on the battlefield. So some of the greatest memorials to Canadian remembrance are over in Europe themselves. And I would encourage you, if you ever get a chance, to go to Vimy Ridge, that you go to Vimy Ridge. It is perhaps the most moving and magnificent memorial ever built by any country. It outshines all the others, and it is truly a great tribute. The statues that are on the memorial at Vimy Ridge can be seen in effigy on the medals that we give to the Silver Cross mothers, to the sacrifice medal that's handed out to soldiers and their families, has the Mother of Canada, which is one of the statues that graces the memorial at Vimy Ridge. It is exceptionally moving. I would encourage you to go visit the cemeteries in Holland. These are, if you can come out of there with dry eyes, then you're stronger fiber than I am. They are truly moving to see the rows and rows of tombstones, all marked with a maple leaf in a cemetery surrounded by maple trees, like a little piece of Canada left for these men that are there. I have visited cemeteries across the country. I've been to Europe, Italy. I've seen Canadian cemeteries in Africa. I've seen them in the Middle East. I've had a chance to participate as an individual in memorials across, for 32 years as a soldier, and I continue to do it, but across this world. So we are actually very, very good as a community, as a group, as a tribe, as a people to celebrate and mark the remembrance. And you can do so in places like this. You do so by wearing a poppy. But individual acts of remembrance are a different thing. Every time you put a poppy on Remembrance Day, that's an individual act of marking the fact that you are remembering the men that went before you, the men and women that have sacrificed to make this country what it is. But how else do you do it? Do you do a pilgrimage? Do you stop your trip through European great cities to go visit a cemetery? Is an act. But I'm going to tell you a story now to sort of sum up my thoughts on this. That, for me, symbolizes one of the greatest acts of individual remembrance that I could think of. And when I was a major, which is a rank, one below the one I've got, I just finished commanding a company in Bosnia and finished commanding a company of soldiers in Africa. And I went to Staff College in Toronto to learn how to be a senior officer. And on the Staff College, we were lucky enough that we get to go on these battlefield tour trips around the world. And one of the trips we went on was to study the battlefields of Italy, where the Canadians moved up the Adriatic coast of Italy through the town of Rimini and attacked some German defensive lines, the Gothic line and the Hitler line. And we were lucky enough that we had some veterans from that time that had actually fought that. So one was an ex-company commander. His name was General Tellier. He ended up to be a general. But when he had fought in Italy, he was a major and a company commander, just like I had been. And along with him, he brought his companion, Oberst Munn, which was a German colonel that had commanded the German paratroopers that were the enemy to his company. And these two gentlemen had, some 40 to 50 years earlier, fought each other all the way up the Adriatic coast in Italy, and we're now reminiscing on the green fields, not the battlefields anymore, but the green fields of Italy, talking about how they moved their troops around and how they countered each other's moves. And it was fascinating to see. But as we're doing this tour day after day up the coast of Italy, the bus that had us all on it would stop. And it would stop at every war cemetery that was out there. And General Tellier would get off that bus, he would go directly into that cemetery, and he would go to every tombstone of every soldier he lost. He knew exactly where they were, he knew them by name, and he visited them that whole week. And he'd been doing that for years. General Tellier had been invited to do that tour every second year since he had retired. And he went and made that bus and all the rest of the officers stop so that he could go and pay tribute to the men he lost from his company. And I remember thinking, I found that exceptionally moving at the time because I said, that could have been me. I've lost soldiers overseas. I had taken 2 companies on missions overseas in Bosnia and in Africa. And by the grace of God, I didn't lose any soldiers at that time. But I said, that could have been me making that act of remembrance years later. So it's a very moving thing when you see a veteran at a cemetery or over the grave of one of his friends. And maybe you'll get lucky enough to actually witness that kind of solemn passion that in the act of remembrance that individual's committing. And it's a very moving thing. So, unfortunately, unless you're not there, the best we can do is ceremonies like this. And these are good, as long as we continue to remember that these men gave of themselves, their dedication, their time, and their lives in the end, for a cause that today we may not understand, but if we put it into context for their time, shows great bravery and courage and dedication. And if we value it for that cause alone, then I think that's good enough. I don't have too much else to say. Thank you again for letting me speak this morning and being a part of your act of remembrance. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Hand, for your words. I'm now going to read the honor roll. Let us remember those old boys from Rothsay Collegiate School who gave their lives for our freedom during World War I. Louis Allman, Jasper Boyd Andrews, Percy Irving Baker, John Samuel Brown, George Stewart Burchell, John Daniel Brock, Herbert Montgomery Campbell, Reginald Herbert Hamilton Daniel, Frank Russell Fairweather, Arthur Vernon Hatch, James Walter Hawley, Charles Edward Kingdon Jones, Charles Murray Lawson, Ray Mackay, Ralph Markham, Norman Mungle, Theophilus Henry Oliver, Lionel Overton Oliver, George Nugent Dixon Audie, Franklin Sharp Rankin, Earl Markey Scoville, Alexander Seaman, Hugh Mariner Teed, Daniel Lionel Teed, Lawrence Tremaine Wilkinson. Let us remember those old boys from Rothsay Collegiate School who gave their lives for our freedom during World War II. Leo Campbell Armstrong, George Edgar Odd, Donald Allison Black, Charles Corbett Brannan, Peter George Victor Chandler, Arthur DeWitt, Charles Fawcett, Walter William Vassey Foster, Duncan Alexander Hewitt, Eileen Russell Hubbard, Chad Noel Milner Humphreys, Victor Yelverton Haynes, Ralph Royden Ings, Dale Seeley Kent, Arthur Halberton King, John Caldwell Kitchen, David Morris Legasic, Ian Fraser McWatt, Hugh K. McAvity, George Eccles Nixon, George William Alexander Patterson, Thomas Southall Porter, Walter Allison Prescott, Theodore Estabrooks Rising, Thomas Medley Kingdon Richards, William Patterson Sprenger, Charles Lester Stevenson, Gerardus Marinus Stonner, Horace Burpee Tucker. Let us remember those old boys from Rothsay Collegiate School who gave their lives for our freedom during the Korean War. Cyril Harriott, Hugh Maynell.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. Almighty and most merciful God, hear our prayers and thanksgivings for all whom we remember this day, those who laid down their lives in order to preserve the lives of others. Fulfill in them the purpose of your love, and bring us all with them to your eternal joy. Through Jesus Christ the Lord. Amen.
This is a reading from Psalm 46, verses 9 to 10. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way, and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth." This is the word of the Lord.
Please stand with me for our school hymn. God, our help, neighbors fast.
was really nice in the choir. It was lovely. Sarah?